Grab her. Security tackled Jessica face first onto the marble floor. A knee drove into her back. Sir, that drink is poisoned. Poisoned. You spilled a $30,000 bottle and now you are lecturing me. The pH shifted. The color was off by 2 shades. Someone tampered with it. Cuff her before she ruins this entire night. Robert stood frozen, staring down at the waitress bleeding from her lip. Who let this girl near my fiancé's family? 300 of the city's elite went dead silent. The crystal flute lay shattered across the stone champagne, pooling like spilled gold. Jessica did not flinch, did not cry, did not beg. Emily stood 2 feet away, her face a mask of rehearsed shock. But Emily had no idea the waitress pinned beneath that knee already.
Damn, she just knocked a poisoned drink out of a billionaire's hand. Let me take you back.
Jessica woke up before the alarm. She always did. The clock on her phone read 4:47 a.m., its cracked screen casting a pale, thin light across the kitchen table. She sat up. She rolled her neck. She pressed her knuckles into the small of her back until something popped. The ironing board was already out. It was always already out. She unfolded her catering uniform, the white polyester shirt gone soft at the collar from too many washes, and pressed the iron flat against the fabric. Steam rose. The smell of it, that faintly chemical stale heat smell, was as familiar to her as her own name. She worked in slow, careful strokes, not because she had time to be slow, because she could not afford to show up wrinkled. By 5:15, she was out the door. The first bus came late. It always came late on Tuesdays. She stood at the stop with her canvas tote bag hanging from one shoulder, the strap worn down to a fraying thread at the seam where she'd stitched it back twice already. The cold found her through her jacket. She did not move. She stood straight still, quietly waiting, the way she stood in most places, taking up as little space as possible. The second bus dropped her 6 blocks from the community center. She walked fast. Her shoes clean but splitting at the left heel, slapped against the sidewalk in a steady rhythm. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed. They always buzzed, that low, constant, tuneless hum that sat just below the level of speech and just above the level of silence. The smell hit her next. Stale coffee reheated in the same pot it had been reheated in yesterday and the day before that. Someone had brought a box of donuts. Half of them were already gone. Jessica signed in at the front desk, pulled a stack of forms from the supply shelf, and found her usual table near the back. She set down her tote, adjusted the chair, and looked up. The woman at the next table was staring at the form in her hands like it had said something cruel. "Can I help?" Jessica asked. The woman looked up. She was young, maybe 30, with the kind of tired that does not come from one bad night but from a long sequence of them. Her coat was too thin for the season. Her daughter, small and watchful, sat beside her coloring in a notebook with a crayon worn to a stub. "I don't understand this part," the woman said. She pointed at a box on the form. "It keeps asking for a case number, but I don't have a case number yet." Jessica sat down across from her. "That's okay. That field is for people already in the system. You skip it. You write initial application right here instead." The woman blinked. "They don't tell you that anywhere." "No," Jessica said. "They don't." Her name was Amanda. She said it quietly, the way people say their name when they are not sure it is worth saying. She had come from the East Side. Her daughter's name was Lily. Lily did not look up from the notebook. Jessica worked through the form with her line by line, slow and patient. Amanda's handwriting was careful, deliberate, each letter formed like she was worried about being misread. At one point, she stopped mid-sentence and pressed her fingers against her collarbone, a nervous habit touching something beneath the collar of her shirt. The motion was small. Jessica noticed it the way she noticed most things, quietly, without comment. When Amanda's hand shifted, the collar of her shirt moved. Just slightly. Just enough. A pendant caught the light. It was gold. Not gold-toned, not gold-plated, not an approximation of gold designed to look expensive from across the room. This was the real thing, solid and heavy, shaped like the letter B in a typeface, too precise and too deliberate to be anything but custom-made. It hung from a delicate chain, and it sat against Amanda's collarbone like it belonged somewhere else entirely. Jessica looked at it for exactly 1 second. She looked back at the form. "Initial application," she said, "and then your signature here." Amanda signed. She thanked Jessica twice. Lily tore a page carefully out of the notebook, folded it in half, and slid it across the table without looking up. Jessica unfolded it. It was a drawing of a sun with too many rays, each one a different length, and a small figure standing underneath it with her arms out. She folded it back up and put it in her tote bag. By noon, she was at the hotel for her shift orientation. By 2, she was running plates. By 8, she was back on the bus, her feet aching in a specific detailed way she had learned to ignore standing because there were no seats left, holding the pole with one hand and her chemistry textbook with the other. She read standing up. She had been doing it for 2 years. The chapter was on pH reactive indicators, color shifts in acidic compounds, the kind of reaction invisible to the eye until it wasn't that announced itself only in shades. A solution that should read clear, presenting instead with a faint, unmistakable color displacement. 2 shades, sometimes less, never more than that if the dose was small. She highlighted the passage in yellow. She wrote nothing in the margin. She simply read it, absorbed it, closed the book over her thumb to hold the page, and stared at the back of the seat in front of her. The bus lurched. Outside, the city moved past in rectangles of orange light. She thought about the pendant. A solid gold initial, custom-made on a chain too fine and too expensive to belong in a shelter intake line around the neck of a woman who did not know what a case number was and who had arrived alone with a child and a coat too thin for October. The pendant was not hers, or it had been once in some other version of her life, and something had happened in between. Jessica did not have a word for what she was feeling. She had long ago stopped trying to name it. She only knew that the shapes of things did not always match, that surfaces lied, and that the distance between what a person appeared to be and what they actually were could be enormous, cold, and completely invisible to anyone not paying close attention. She got off at her stop. She walked the 2 blocks home. She unlocked the door, did not turn on the overhead light, sat down at the kitchen table, and opened the textbook again. She thought she was just studying for a final. She had no idea that chapter was already working its way towards something she could not yet see. The Crestfield Hotel did not welcome people like Jessica. It tolerated them. It needed them to carry things, pour things, clear things away, and then disappear back into the parts of the building that guests were never meant to see. The service entrance was on the north side, a heavy steel door that opened onto a corridor of bare concrete and exposed pipe lit by the same type of buzzing fluorescent tube as the community center, though here it felt less like poverty and more like intention, as if the hotel had decided that the people who worked in these corridors did not require anything prettier. Jessica badged in at 6:47 p.m. She changed in the locker room, hung her tote on the hook inside her assigned locker, and checked her reflection in the small, scratched mirror bolted to the wall. The uniform collar sat stiff against her neck. The polyester caught the light in a way that looked almost formal from a distance. Almost. She clipped her name tag on straight. She picked up her tray. She went to work. The ballroom opened onto a foyer the size of a small park. 6 champagne towers rose along the far wall, each one catching the chandelier light and throwing it back in long liquid gold columns stacked glass over glass over glass, trembling faintly whenever someone walked too close. The air was thick. Expensive perfume layered over roasted duck, over candle wax, over something warm and floral she could not name. It pressed against her like weather. 300 guests moved through the room in clusters. Jewelry caught the light at every turn. Voices overlapped in that particular register of money, smooth and unhurried. The register of people who have never once worried about the bus running late. Jessica moved through them like water around stone. Tray level, eyes forward, invisible. A man in a charcoal suit stepped backward without looking and nearly took the tray out of her hands. He did not apologize. He did not turn around. He resumed his conversation and she stepped sideways and kept moving. This was the work, not the pouring, not the carrying. This. Near the entrance to the east corridor, she paused to reposition a water pitcher on her tray. The wall beside her held a series of framed photographs, the kind that old hotels hung in their public spaces to signal lineage and permanence. Black and white at the left end, shifting to color on the right. Family portraits, formal and symmetrical, taken at intervals of what looked like a decade each. Jessica glanced at them the way she glanced at most things, quickly, efficiently cataloging without lingering. She stopped. The most recent portrait was large, maybe 3 feet across, in a heavy gilded frame. 4 people arranged in front of what looked like a stone terrace. A man tall and silver-haired seated in the center with the particular stillness of someone accustomed to being looked at. A woman beside him, elegant, composed. 2 children standing behind them, teenagers, a boy and a girl, the girl slightly apart from the others. Her posture fractionally turned as if she had been asked to stand closer and had quietly refused. Jessica looked at the girl's face. She looked at it for a long time. The nose was the same. The set of the jaw. The way the eyes held something private and did not offer it to the camera. 20 years had passed, maybe more, but the architecture of a face does not change in the ways that matter. It rearranges around the same foundation. The silver-haired man in the portrait was Robert Crestfield. His name was on the building. His name was on the gala program tucked into the pocket of Jessica's uniform. His engagement gala, the event she was currently working in the hotel that bore his name. The girl in the portrait was Amanda. Jessica set the water pitcher down on the nearest surface. She straightened. She picked it back up. She kept moving. She poured water at table 7. She collected empty glasses near the champagne towers. She brought a fresh plate of crostini to the east appetizer station and returned the empty tray to the kitchen pass-through. She did all of it with the same steady, careful attention she brought to everything. She was thinking about the pendant. A solid gold B, not for a first name, for a family name. The kitchen pass-through window swung open and the floor manager gave her a hand signal. Table 12 needed water service. She turned and crossed the room, threading between guests, tray angled slightly, to navigate the gap between 2 groups who had positioned themselves without any apparent awareness that other people required passage. She was 3 feet from table 12 when she heard it. Emily's voice was low and deliberate, the specific low of someone who has chosen that register precisely, who knows exactly how far their voice carries and has calibrated it accordingly. She was speaking to a man Jessica did not recognize, a man who had the look of someone who was not on the guest list, and knew it, whose jacket was slightly wrong for the room, who held his champagne glass by the bowl instead of the stem. "After the toast," Emily said, "not before." The man nodded once. He moved away. Jessica poured water at table 12. Her hand was perfectly steady. The water went into the glass without touching the rim. She did not look at Emily directly. She did not need to. She filed the words in the same place she had filed the pendant, the portrait, the chapter on pH indicators, the girl who stood slightly apart in every photograph, as if she already knew she would eventually be somewhere else. She was supposed to remain invisible tonight. Every person in this room was counting on it. She was the only one with her eyes wide open. The staff locker room smelled like industrial cleaner and old rubber. It sat at the end of the north corridor, past the linen carts and the dry storage room, behind a door that did not lock properly and swung open if you did not pull it fully closed. Jessica had noticed this on her first walkthrough. She noticed most structural failures on first contact. It was the kind of attention that came from a life in which things breaking without warning had consequences. She was not in the locker room when it happened. She was on the floor working table rounds when the man in the slightly wrong jacket slipped through the service corridor door at 8:34 p.m. She did not see him. No one saw him. The kitchen was running at full volume, pans clattering against the steel countertops in a sharp, overlapping percussion that swallowed every other sound completely, the kind of noise that fills a space so thoroughly that it creates its own privacy. He was inside the locker room for less than 2 minutes. He came out without the vial. On the floor, the gala was reaching its middle register. The champagne towers had been partially dismantled and replaced with individual service. Guests moved between tables with the loosened, louder energy of people 2 drinks in. A quartet played something soft and European in the far corner, nearly inaudible beneath the accumulated weight of 300 conversations. Jessica carried a tray of crystal flutes, each one balanced with the precise geometry of long practice. The glasses caught the chandelier light and held it clean and sharp, refracting it into small bright points that moved across her uniform as she walked. Beside the tray, invisible against her palm, the rough edge of a cracked thumbnail. She had caught it on a locker hinge 2 hours ago. She had not had time to file it down. A hand reached out, not for a glass, for the tray itself. A man in a cream dinner jacket gripped the edge of her tray as she passed, not to take it, not to stop her, simply to demonstrate that he could, that the objects she was carrying were available to him in whatever way he chose to make them available. He lifted his chin slightly in the direction of an empty table nearby. "Those need to go there," he said. She looked at the table. It already had glasses on it. "Of course," she said. She moved toward the table. He watched her for a moment, satisfied, and turned back to his group. She set 2 glasses down. She straightened. She kept moving. At the far end of the room near the head table, a guest caught her eye. Not with intention. With the specific, practiced non-intention of someone who wanted a witness to what they were about to do. He looked at her directly. He looked down at the 2 empty champagne flutes on the table beside him. He looked back at her. He picked one up and held it out over the marble floor. He let it go. It shattered. The sound cracked through a brief gap in the quartet's phrasing. Several heads turned. The man looked down at the broken glass with an expression of theatrical surprise, then looked up at Jessica with the expectation of service. She crossed the room. She crouched. She began collecting the pieces, careful, methodical, using the folded cloth from her apron pocket. A shard caught the light beside her knee, thin and bright and sharp-edged. She picked it up between 2 fingers. She did not look at his shoes. She did not need to. The Italian leather was directly in her peripheral vision, polished to a mirror finish, catching her own reflection back at her in miniature, distorted, crouched and small, and collecting glass from a floor she had not broken. "Thank you," the man said in the tone of someone who had not said thank you. She stood. She folded the cloth around the glass fragments. She took the pieces to the kitchen and deposited them in the designated waste bin, because even broken things in this hotel had a designated place. At the head table, Emily stood with her back to the room, watching the catering staff arrange the special glasses for the toast. There were 6 of them, set apart from the general service inventory, marked with a subtle ring of tape on the base that only the catering lead would recognize. Emily watched the pour with an absolute absence of expression, not concern, not anticipation, nothing. The face of someone running a calculation in which the outcome was not in question. She did not touch the glasses. She did not need to. Her accomplice had already done the work. She simply watched, still and patient, while the head table was set, and the staff moved around her like a river finding its way around a stone, the way they moved around all the guests, as though the guests were fixed, and the staff were the thing that had to rearrange itself. Jessica came back through the east corridor at 9:12 p.m. for a fresh tray. She passed her locker. She did not open it. She had no reason to open it yet. Inside it, in the front pocket of her canvas tote, a small glass vial sat upright against the spine of her chemistry textbook. Clear liquid, no label, perfectly still. She did not know it was there. She picked up her new tray and went back to the floor. Emily glanced at her as she passed the head table. Not a long glance, not a meaningful one. The kind of glance you give a piece of furniture you are satisfied is in the right position. She looked away before Jessica had cleared the table's radius. She was not worried about the waitress. She was not worried about anything. Her trap was in place, clean and untraceable, or so she believed, because she had planned for everything a person of her world would think to plan for. She had not planned for chemistry textbooks read on buses at 8 in the evening. She had not planned for a woman who noticed the shapes of things other people walked past without seeing, who filed away the information quietly and carried it forward, who had been paying attention from the moment she walked through the service entrance. Emily thought her trap was flawless. She had no idea that science does not lie.
Wait, she just framed a waitress who works 2 jobs to survive. If that were me, my blood would be boiling. Imagine sitting there knowing you're setting an innocent girl up to take the fall for murder. The audacity is real.
The toast was scheduled for 10 p.m. At 9:41, Jessica came to the head table with a water pitcher. Standard service. She moved to the right side first, the way she always moved, clockwise. Efficient tray balanced on her left palm. She poured for the first guest. She stepped to the second. She was reaching for the third glass when she saw it. Robert's glass was already poured. The champagne sat at the correct level, pale gold still, with the fine, persistent bubble of good vintage rising through the center column. Everything about it looked right. Everything about it was consistent with the other glasses on the table. Except the color. It was off. Not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself. 2 shades darker than the glass directly beside it, a shift so subtle that it existed at the edge of perception, the place where the eye registers something without forming the thought into language. Most people would have dismissed it. Most people would not have had a chapter on pH reactive indicators highlighted in yellow inside their bag. Jessica set the pitcher down. She looked at the glass again. She looked at the glass beside it. She looked back. Her brain did not panic. It did not spiral. It moved the way it always moved under pressure, clinically, sequentially, pulling the information it had and running it forward. A color displacement of 2 shades in a champagne solution indicated a pH shift. A pH shift in a sealed, poured glass indicated introduction of a compound after the bottle was opened. A compound introduced after pouring in a single glass at a table where one specific person was seated was not an accident. She looked at Robert. He was talking to the man on his left, one hand resting on the table, relaxed, comfortable, entirely unaware. He was 4 minutes from picking up that glass and drinking from it in front of 300 people. She had approximately 15 seconds to make a decision that would either save his life or end hers. She moved. Not fast. Fast would have looked wrong, would have drawn the wrong attention in the wrong direction. She moved with the specific, controlled purpose of someone performing a service function, angling her body between Robert and the nearest cluster of guests, reaching across with her right hand, as if to adjust the placement of the glass. She hit it clean. Open palm, full contact, a single decisive strike that sent the crystal flute off the edge of the table and into the air. It hit the marble floor and detonated. The sound was enormous in the way that small sounds become enormous in sudden silence. The quartet stopped on an unresolved chord. 300 conversations collapsed into 0. The champagne spread across the marble in a pale, irregular stain, soaking immediately into the hem of Jessica's uniform. Grab her. She did not know who said it. It did not matter. Hands landed on her shoulders before the last glass fragment stopped skittering across the floor. David Head of hotel security was fast and professional and entirely without hesitation. He took her down the way he had been trained to take people down, forward, and controlled one knee finding the center of her back, her cheek connecting with the cold marble at an angle that split her lip against her own teeth. The taste of copper filled her mouth. Bright, immediate, specific. She did not fight it. She went still. Robert stood. He looked down at her from what felt like a very great distance. His expression frozen somewhere between shock and a question he had not yet formed into words. Who is this girl? Jessica's cheek was against the floor. She could feel the champagne soaking through her uniform at the knee. She could feel David's weight on her back. She could taste blood. She spoke anyway. That champagne had a pH shift, she said. Her voice came out level. She had not planned for it to come out level. It simply did. The color was off by 2 shades. Someone added something that wasn't supposed to be there. The silence in the room was the particular silence of people who are reassessing what they are looking at. Emily stood 2 feet from the edge of the head table. Her expression was perfect. Horrified, open a mask of shock so precisely calibrated that it would have read as genuine to anyone who had not spent the last 3 hours watching her watch the glasses being poured with the empty patience of someone who already knew the outcome. David's knee shifted against Jessica's spine. "Don't move," he said. "I'm not moving," she said. Robert had not looked away from her. He was still looking at her with that same frozen expression, the one that had not yet resolved into anything. He looked at the spilled liquid spreading across the marble. He looked at the broken glass. He looked at the stain on the floor, the champagne soaking into the grout lines, the pale puddle that had been in a glass 60 seconds ago and was now evidence of something he did not yet have a name for. He turned to David. "Don't discard it," he said. His voice was quiet, precise, the voice of a man who had made decisions under pressure before and knew what that felt like. "Test every drop, every single drop." David looked up from Jessica. "Sir?" "Every drop," Robert said again. "The glass, the floor, the uniform, all of it." Emily's expression did not change. She was too practiced for that. But something behind the expression shifted, a recalculation happening somewhere beneath the surface, too fast and too small to be visible to anyone who was not by now specifically watching her. Jessica felt the marble against her cheek. Cold, unforgiving, indifferent to the difference between guilt and innocence. Her wrists were pulled behind her back. The handcuffs came from David's belt with a practiced click, the steel hard and immediate against her skin. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. She thought about the color of the champagne, 2 shades, the specific measurable distance between what something appeared to be and what it actually was. She thought about chemistry. She thought about what happens when you introduce the right compound to the right solution and simply wait for the evidence to declare itself. Emily had played a terrified victim with flawless precision. She had no idea the lab results were already coming for her. The basement room had no windows. It had 4 walls, a drain in the floor, a metal chair bolted to the concrete, and a fluorescent light overhead that did not buzz so much as stutter, catching and releasing at irregular intervals, as if it too was struggling to hold itself together. The smell was bleach and cold air and something underneath both of those things that she could not name and did not want to. Jessica sat in the chair. Her wrists were cuffed to the armrest. The steel had warmed slightly against her skin, which was somehow worse than when it had been cold. David sat across from her at a folding table. He had a legal pad and a pen and the expression of a man doing his job, which was to say no expression at all. "The vial," he said. "In your locker, in your bag." She looked at him. "Tell me about that." "I don't know what vial," she said. He turned the legal pad toward her. A photograph printed on standard paper, slightly blurry at the edges the way security cam stills always were. Her locker. Open. Her canvas tote, the strap frayed at the seam where she had stitched it twice. The front pocket unzipped. A small glass vial, clear liquid, no label, resting against the spine of something she recognized immediately as her chemistry textbook. She looked at the photograph for a long time. "That's not mine," she said. "It was in your bag." "It was placed in my bag." David wrote something on the legal pad. His pen moved in short, deliberate strokes. "You're a catering employee with no prior connection to this hotel, no prior connection to Mr. Crestfield working your 3rd shift on a contract placement." He looked up. "And your story is that someone planted a controlled compound in your personal bag in a locked staff area on the same night you physically assaulted a guest." "I stopped an assault," she said. "That's one interpretation." She looked at the drain in the floor. She looked at the stuttering light. She looked back at David. "You're looking at federal charges," he said. It was not a threat. It was information delivered the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis, without pleasure, without apology. Attempted poisoning, assault, trespassing beyond your designated work area. If the compound in that vial matches what we find in the residue, we're talking about decades. The light stuttered, caught, released. Decades. She had heard the word before. She had heard it applied to other people in news segments and case studies in the abstract register of things that happened to someone else somewhere else under circumstances that do not resemble yours. She had never heard it applied to the specific geography of her own future. She thought about the 2 buses, the 5 a.m. iron, the forms she had filled out at the community center table while Lily colored with a crayon worn to nothing. The chapter she had read standing up on a moving bus holding a pole with one hand because she had not had time to read it sitting down. She thought about doing everything right. She thought about what it cost to do everything right, to be meticulous and careful and attentive and present, and then to end up handcuffed to a metal chair in a windowless basement room because someone with more power than you needed a place to put the blame. The system was not broken. That was the thing no one said out loud. A broken system implied malfunction, implied that something had gone wrong with a mechanism that was otherwise sound. This was not that. This was the system operating exactly as it had been designed to operate, efficiently, invisibly, with the weight distributed precisely onto the people who could least afford to carry it. She had known this. She had always known this. She had known it the way you know the weather, as a condition, as a fact of the environment, something to navigate around rather than a problem to solve. Knowing it and sitting inside it were 2 different things. The light stuttered again. The bleach smell pressed closer. She made herself breathe. She was not going to cry in front of David. Not because she was too proud to cry, but because crying would use energy she did not have available for anything else, and she needed everything she had left for thinking. She thought about the security footage. Every hotel of this caliber ran continuous recording on every service corridor, every staff entrance, every locker room approach. She had noticed the cameras on her first walkthrough the way she noticed structural failures. There was one at the North Corridor junction angled to cover the locker room door. There was one inside the locker room itself, mounted high in the corner above the lockers, its red indicator light barely visible against the ceiling, unless you were looking for it. She had been looking for it. The footage existed. It existed right now on a server somewhere in this building. It showed a corridor she had not walked down at 8:34 p.m. It showed a door she had not opened. It showed a man whose jacket had been slightly wrong for the room. She did not know if anyone was looking at it. She did not know if anyone would think to look. Upstairs, she knew Emily was accepting condolences, accepting perhaps a fresh glass of champagne crystal and clean and the correct color all the way through. Standing in a ballroom full of people who had just watched a waitress get tackled to the floor and were filing that information into the appropriate category without questioning the category itself. The door at the top of the basement stairs opened. Footsteps. She heard David's name spoken in the low register of someone delivering a message they had been told to deliver quietly. David stood. He looked at her once, without expression. He went to the door. She heard the word investigator. She heard the word federal. She heard the word tapes. She sat in the dark and the cold, handcuffed to a chair in a room that smelled like bleach, and somewhere above her the truth was already moving. She could not see it yet. She could not feel it. But she had read enough about chemical reactions to know this. Once a process begins, it does not require your permission to continue. She was locked in the dark. The truth was already sprinting up the stairs. 2 a.m. The ballroom had not emptied. Robert had seen to that. At 1:47, he had sent word through David to the remaining guests quietly without explanation that their presence was requested at the main table. Not suggested. Requested. The distinction was understood by everyone in the room. They came. 31 people, the inner circle, the ones who had stayed after the chaos of the shattered glass and the handcuffs and the girl on the floor. They arranged themselves around the head table in the particular silence of people who know something is about to happen and have not yet decided how to position themselves relative to it. Emily sat at the far end. She had changed nothing about her appearance. Her gown was still immaculate, her diamonds catching the chandelier light with the same cold precision as 3 hours ago. She held her hands loosely in her lap. Her expression was composed, sympathetic, faintly concerned, the expression she had been wearing since the moment the glass shattered. It had not shifted once. Matthew stood behind her. His face was a different story entirely. Robert stood at the head of the table. He did not sit. He looked at the room the way he had looked at the spilled champagne, with a specific, deliberate attention. The attention of a man cataloging the distance between what he had believed to be true and what the evidence was now telling him. He nodded to the technician at the side wall. The projector came on. The screen filled with security footage. Timestamp 8:34 p.m. North Service Corridor camera angle covering the locker room approach. The resolution was clean, the lighting adequate, the framing exactly what it needed to be. The man in the slightly wrong jacket walked into frame. He moved quickly, purposefully, without hesitation. He pushed open the locker room door. He was inside for 1 minute and 53 seconds. He came out without the vial. He walked back up the corridor and out of frame. No one at the table spoke. Robert nodded again. The footage changed. A second clip. Financial records projected in clean columns, account numbers and transfer dates, and the name of a shell company that appeared 4 times in 4 separate transactions over 6 weeks. The shell company's registered agent was a name no one at the table recognized. The account it fed into was one they did. The transfers were precise, unhurried, and evenly spaced, the financial signature of someone who had been confident they would never be examined. Emily's hands were still in her lap. "The compound in the vial," Robert said, "matches the residue pulled from the base of my glass." He said it the way he said everything tonight, quietly, without inflection, as if volume would somehow cheapen the information. "It also matches a compound purchased under a subsidiary account, linked to the same shell company in the records you are currently looking at." He looked at Emily. She looked back at him. "Robert," she said. Her voice was even warm. The voice of someone who has decided that the best available move is to keep performing the role until the last possible moment. "This is clearly designed to make it look." "Don't," he said. One word, no heat in it, simply a door closing. Emily stopped. The room was absolutely silent, not the silence of 300 people going still in shock the way it had been at 10 p.m. when the glass shattered. This was smaller, denser, the silence of 31 people in a confined space who were realizing one by one that they had been standing next to something they had not identified correctly. The basement door opened. David came through first. He held the door. Jessica walked in behind him. She had wiped the blood from her lip, but the split was still visible, a thin, dark line at the left corner of her mouth. Her uniform was stained at the knee where the champagne had soaked through. Her name tag was still on straight. She stood at the edge of the room and looked at the projection screen and then at Robert, and then at nothing in particular, her hands at her sides, her posture exactly what it always was. Straight. Still. Taking up the precise amount of space she occupied and no more. The room looked at her. She did not perform anything for them. She did not arrange her expression into vindication or relief or anger. She simply stood there and let the evidence on the screen do what evidence does. Emily tried once more. She's a catering employee who clearly had access to the chemicals in question, given her area of study, and who physically... "She studies chemistry," Robert said, "because she is working her way through a degree while holding 2 jobs. He looked at Emily with something that was not anger. Anger would have been easier. This was something older and colder and far more permanent. The footage shows she did not enter the staff corridor at any point between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. The vial in her bag was placed there while she was on the floor. You can see her on camera in the ballroom at the exact timestamp your associate entered the locker room. Matthew made a sound, not a word, something that did not make it all the way to language. Jessica looked at Robert. "There's something else," she said. Her voice was the same as it had been on the floor, with her cheek against the marble. Level, deliberate. The voice of someone who has decided that precision costs less than volume. "Your daughter," she said. "Amanda, I know her." The room did not react. Most of the room did not know there was a daughter to react to. Robert went very still in the specific way of someone receiving information that reorganizes something fundamental. "She came to the community center," Jessica said, 3 months ago.